Right, so I think without any further ado, we will begin with our Jakub, it's 8th webinar in the SPM series today. How do you feel about it? It's
long way home.
Long way home, and this will be the last webinar before we actually begin, maybe not our summer vacation, before we begin our summer break with our webinar series. So hopefully you will find this session interesting and insightful at the same time today. As usual, our webinar will last approximately 25 minutes, leaving about 5 minutes towards the end for the actual questions you may have, which you may post throughout the entire session. You don't necessarily need to wait until end. All right, so I think that's it about from the logistics standpoint. A short round of introductions. Myself is I'm Christoph, one of the co-founders at Quistor, which is a strategic portfolio management technology and consulting house. And together with me is the other co-founder, Jakub. Good morning again, Jakub.
Good morning, Christoph.
Hi there. All right, so I think let's kick off today's session with interesting topic of actually you may say this is about sustainability, but this will be also about, to some extent, Jakub, stakeholder capitalism. This will be also about ESG. Before we actually get there and look at our agenda, short introduction to SPM as a process in general. We keep repeating probably ourselves here, but we've always talked about shareholder value today, shareholder value tomorrow, shareholder value in, I don't know, like 5 years from now. And the essence of SPM has always been about increasing this shareholder value through various initiatives that will come from different places in the organizations, be of different types, and that's okay. But what if I at the same time, and already here Jakub said that in between shareholder and value, you could place an equality sign and say that this is also about increasing the stakeholder value. What would you say about that? I mean, when we say shareholders should, to some extent in the context of SPM, equal stakeholders.
I think that this is a very, let's say, valid concept. Of course, my personal belief is that shareholders are as the capital givers. They are still in the focus, but of course, looking at a broader group, stakeholders, it's also extremely important, and it is, of course, also interconnected with bringing the value to the shareholders. So by stakeholders, we may understand a much broader concept of entities involved directly or indirectly, like vendors, customer, employees, the whole ecosystem and the whole environment. This is how we understand stakeholders. It is a very valid concept, of course, and becoming more and more important nowadays.
Exactly. The reason I made this maybe to some extent controversial statement at the beginning is because stakeholder capitalism, in a sense, is becoming more and more important today. I mean, when we look at some of the statistics that are provided by World Economic Forum, there are more than 120 companies already today, Fortune 500 organizations, that have helped to co-design the stakeholder capitalism metrics, which is a set of data points that allow organizations to report not only the non-financial disclosures, really, because financial reporting has been there for many years. But what about different types of reporting that are also important for when you are doing the business, when you're thinking about launching new initiatives, and we'll talk about them. What about your carbon footprint? What about the environmental impact you have? What about your corporate practices that you have in place? And so on and so forth. So as you said, stakeholders are becoming more and more important, and the list include, but it's probably not only limited to your employees, your customers, your partners, business partners, different communities you serve or you're impacting with your products or services, and also entire countries. So the term stakeholders can be very, very wide. And as you can see at the bottom statistics, more than 150 organizations have already committed to this measurement approach, and approximately half of them have already adopted it to some extent. Of course, you still have various different standards and reporting frameworks in place, but this is something that is already now happening. And I believe this takes us to this first point that we have on our agenda about ESG. I will elaborate together with you, Jakub, on the concept. The ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance impact that organizations have with the way they do their business on actually the entire ecosystems around them. So, Jakub, if you don't mind starting and introducing the ESG framework, or actually ESG concept, and why it is important in the context of SPM here.
Okay. So you may think about ESG as an intellectual successor for CSR, corporate social responsibility, but ESG is, at least in my view, much more detailed, much more concrete than CSR, which was somehow in many cases treated as a more or less PR activity for the companies. ESG is something strong, something solid, quite detailed, and more importantly, it is becoming more and more regulated. So it is something which is not nice to have, rather than must have. If we look, for example, at the EU environment, the regulations are changing dynamically, and so-called Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is actually imposing quite a lot of information obligations and reporting obligations on companies. Right now, it is mostly related to large organizations, but in the future it will be probably also forced on the smallest ones. And it is being imposed in a quite smart way, because it is being designed into the financial system. Therefore, how the companies are managing ESG is becoming part of how they are being perceived by the capital and financial markets, which is,
I think we lost the voice.
Institutions.
Oh, now you're back. You were gone for just a second.
Okay. Some technical issues. Actually, I have internet connection issues since yesterday. Probably the heat. I don't know, the temperatures. So actually, ESG is becoming part of the assessment process when a financial institution wants to be engaged with a company. But let's try to look at those examples here. What do we understand by ESG? So environment part, it is mostly about carbon footprint, about waste management, about water management. Basically, we may think about it as the green part of ESG. So how companies operating can actually impact the environment, the ecology, basically, looking at their processes, looking how their products are, for example, being manufactured, how they are behaving during their life cycles, how it all impacts the environment. Social part is mostly about people, about employees, about how, let's say, equality. So we may think about diversity or equality in workplace, about how you treat your employees, how you treat basically people. So the S part is, you can think of it like through people lenses. And governance is mostly about anti-corruption, about ethics, about basically business conduct standards. So those three parts are let's say ESG, and again they are becoming extremely important, and at least in European Union, I think in most of the world nowadays, they are becoming mandatory. So implementing somehow, let's say, some measures for ESG, some ways of managing ESG is not a nice to have thing anymore, like it was with CSR. It is a must-have thing, and it becomes more and more regulated, more and more, let's say, described and defined.
Right. So what you're saying is that in a way that this is not yet mandatory, right? I mean, we are on the way.
It is. But I mean, I can refer. I'm not, let's say, legal expert here, but in European Union, at least, it is mandatory for those listed large companies, very large companies, and I think since 2023 it will be mandatory also to some extent for companies which are above SME level, small and medium enterprise level, and in the future, also SME level, small and medium enterprises will be also required to follow some standards. Of course, they are different for depending on the size and of course the capability to report and to work with this ESG. But it is for some companies it is already a mandatory thing.
Probably for the big ones, right? I mean, and when we look at the example of those metrics here that we have, I mean, it all makes such a perfect sense, because we know that we have only one global Earth that we live in, so we need to take care of the carbon footprint. We should take care of the air quality, energy management, fuel management, and so on and so forth. Similarly, when we have the social aspect of it, I mean, diversity, inclusion is a big thing. I mean, you should have work equality. Probably, I mean, there are already some companies that are introducing the, in a sense, those kind of directions that there should be equal amount of women and men in the management boards or advisory boards, so to say. So from that perspective, it is important. Yet I believe it is quite a high level. So what I'm willing to understand now is, how do you bring in 1 or 2 levels down, so when you really can look at your portfolio of initiatives at your SPM, strategic portfolio management process, and incorporate this ESG type of metrics frameworks into it. So I kind of imagine that not all of those will be present there when you sort of calculate or analyze individual initiatives that may be of new product development type. Yet still, you should have that kind of factor built in your SPM, right? So can you please elaborate a little bit more on how organizations can actually sort of work it sort of bottom up, so that they know that in the end the ESG factors will be fulfilled?
So first of all, maybe let's still relate to this kind of high level thing. So if ESG becomes something, let's say, more tangible and measurable, and there are some standards for measuring, for differentiating between companies, this company is good at ESG, this is not that good, for example, and therefore we prefer company A to company B. So it becomes some kind of a competitive metrics on a very high level, and therefore ESG strategies emerge. So companies want to be improving with ESG. So they set some goals and they create ESG strategies and they report the execution of those strategies and they measure that. Therefore, it is a strategic thing right now, basically, also to perform with regard to ESG. So this is like a corporate wide level. But if we look at more, let's say, business processes like strategic portfolio management, this is very important for ESG, as strategic portfolio management is about new initiatives, new projects, which are actually taking the company from point A to point B, also with regard to ESG. Therefore, this becomes like a natural, obvious thing that sustainability, it's like a interchangeable term with ESG in our thinking here. So sustainability equals ESG, basically, is something you would like to measure, understand, and also let's say look at when you are making your investment decisions. So not only bringing direct economic profits and direct economic value, but also bringing this, let's call it stakeholder value, through sustainability improvements and through ESG improvements. Therefore, it seems to us natural way to also follow this in your decision patterns, in your decision-making process when considering strategic initiatives and projects. So what we propose here is basically to include sustainability as a separate tool, separate measure, separate set of metrics, actually, to incorporate in your strategic portfolio management process next to traditional strategic impact, traditional risk assessment, economic value estimation, or dependency analysis. So this is something you, as a decision maker, would like to clearly see and be able to differentiate between different projects, be able to understand what sustainability improvements, particular investment or particular initiative or a group of initiatives is actually giving the organization. Therefore, we think that it is a mandatory, almost mandatory thing to incorporate in your strategic portfolio management process as a part of decision support tools.
How you then align this kind of reporting and let's call it even broader 360-degree view of a particular initiative, because this is something we discussed during one of our previous webinars. We said about combining the value, the risk, the impact. Now it's sustainability there, which stands for ESG. So this IRVD framework now should be called, or is called, IRVDS, which is impact, risk, value, dependencies, and sustainability. How can you align it with some of the frameworks out there, or shall we kind of look for some sort of specific data metrics and KPIs, or more or less sort of like decide on, okay, this is now in line with the environmental KPIs. We are using lots of energy, lots of water. We are using lots of plastics to sort of come up with new products. So it really makes sense that we try to reduce the water we use in the production process, that we try to reduce the energy, all in all, that we sort of like source only recyclable plastics and other commodities. How would you define that?
I mean, first of all, it is very much industry specific. And second of all, it is also related to what strategic portfolio inside of organization we are considering. So if we are looking at, for example, new product development portfolio, you may probably be thinking mostly, and you are a manufacturing company, you will be probably thinking about the E part, the environmental part, and looking at carbon footprint reduction, or your life cycle waste management, or recyclability of your products. And the products you are thinking about, you're designing and developing, they will probably not directly impact, let's say, the social part. therefore it is very, let's say, depending on the not only the sector in the industry, but also the let's say part of the organization we are talking about, and it can be a mix. And we may implement this sustainability approach to the let's call it traditional projects, traditional initiatives, as well as also specific portfolios aimed at improving ESG or aimed at sustainability, basically. So, I mean, it is like a quite vast concept, and it may also include some quantitative measures. So if we consider, for example, product development and carbon footprint reduction, we may think about very quantitative ways of measuring, while if we are assessing, for example, social parts, government parts, we may be looking at more fuzzy qualitative kind of, let's say, approach to measure that, how the particular initiative is actually supporting our improvements in ESG. So, I mean, this is like a deep dive thing, which we probably should think about with regard to next webinars, how to let's say describe it in more details. But what is an important takeaway here is that sustainability is a very important and differentiated, let's say, tool in our strategic portfolio management tool set. So it is becoming mandatory, it is a separate thing, and it is something you would like to look into as a separate part next to, for example, NPV, and measure it. So this is like the key takeaway here, without getting into too much details, having in mind the time limitations and let's say, yeah.
It actually means you can consolidate different factors and data points from individual initiatives into some sort of like programs and portfolios, and then sort of like capture the broader perspective, which then can be reported on a corporate level. But this will be then the way to sort of like ensure that you have and you maintain this data transparency, standardization, and at the same sort of like time integration in your reporting structure, because you're sort of like taking the necessary data sets from individual initiatives from inside of your SPM in a way. So before we jump to the takeaways and conclusions, one question still, we write here about crowdsourcing. Can this also help in the context of ESG reporting and management?
Of course it can, especially if we are considering some of those fuzzy aspects of ESG. So if we consider, for example, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and we can measure that our new product will be, let's say, producing exact carbon footprint, then probably crowdsourcing is not the way. But if we are considering more, let's say, soft aspects, more factors which are subject to opinions, then of course crowdsourcing may be a central point here to be able to assess the sustainability impact. But sustainability is like a different beast than strategic impact, for example, measurement. So it is more, I think, diverse with regard to details.
Got it. All right. So let's maybe jump. We've talked about it a little bit already, Jakub, about this importance of SPM. Can you take us through the main takeaways of today's session before we jump into the Q&A part?
Yes. Basically, so why it is important in the whole SPM thing, the ESG thing in context of SPM. So first of all, if we are managing the strategic portfolio, we would like to know how it actually fits our ESG strategy. So we are like basically supporting our decisions in the context of ESG strategy, and also providing data and information to ESG reporting on a corporate level. So this is like an internal thing. Another thing which might be the case, and this probably especially relates to R&D or new product development, is to address customer requirements. So if we are designing and developing new products, we may be, let's say, subject to some kind of requirements from our customers. They might be very strict or direct, like for example in automotive business. They might be more fuzzy, more like undefined, but yet directionally expressed. But this kind of customer pressure might be also the case for us to think about it in context of our SPM. And the third, last but not least, but probably extremely important, is also to enable external financing. As I mentioned in the beginning, the way the ESG thing is implemented on a governmental level or institutional level is mostly through financing institutions. So if you are, let's say, planning a new investment and you are applying for an investment loan to a bank, bank will ask you for investment analysis of your project, investment efficiency analysis of the project, but will also try to understand the impact on ESG, because financial institutions are now required to look at this factor. Same for capital markets, same for other investors, not only the loan providers, but also shareholder capital providers. All the, let's say, financing institutions and entities are now looking at the impact of on ESG, the ESG, let's say, score, let's call it like that. Therefore, if you are planning new projects, new initiatives, you also need to think about how they will be financed, and therefore you are very interested in what is the ESG score for your initiatives and portfolios.
Right. So these are the really good and great takeaways from today's session. I guess for pretty much every organization out there, the ESG is kind of a new thing. I mean, it's just a new thing for us. Although we already now we sort of like working together with a couple of our clients and sort of exploring, defining their various ESG strategies, whether it's the context of the entire corporate or in the context of new product developments, etc. So if you would like to learn more about how we may potentially help, feel free to reach out. We'll be more than happy to support. And right now it's time for the last before the summer Q&A in the webinar series. So we have two questions. The first question: there are many things more than financial to consider when making strategic prioritization decisions. Consider impact, sustainability, risk, dependencies. Is it possible to get easy to understand overview for each project and also for big portfolios? Is graphical user interface a key thing?
Yes, the straight answer is yes. I strongly believe that making portfolio complexity more approachable is the key to efficient strategic portfolio management process. So if you have the framework built properly, all the KPIs calculated in a proper way, then you may think about easy to understand aggregated measures and also visualizations, which basically help you to navigate faster and more efficiently. So yes, the answer is yes. I strongly believe in visualization, interactive approach also to visualization with data drill downs, with simple things shown in a meaningful way, basically. But right, to be able to get there, you need to be assured about what is underneath, how the data is created, because not avoid this complexity at the bottom. You may automatize it, you may standardize it, but there will be this complexity. But if you have trust to the foundation, the data and the processing underneath, you may then create very simple, nice looking, interactive visualizations, which will make your life easier, basically.
Right, thank you for that. Last question I will just briefly answer, because this is about crowdsourcing and whom to involve in this kind of assessment. As usual, it depends, but this is something we try to answer in the probably strategic impact type of webinar when we had a similar question. The main thing is that when you have a process of actually involving people, sending them simple questionnaires in a very standardized way, it is a lot easier than to decide, okay, we need somebody from the production, R&D, marketing, and human resources side, maybe to help us with the overall ESG score assessment. But there is not an yet easy definable answer to say, okay, for this type of projects, we always involve those kind of people from those departments. All right, so I guess this concludes our today's session. I hope you don't mind on us being 1 minute over. We would like to thank you for attending today's session, and for those who are with us from the beginning for attending the entire series. Now it's time for a summer break. I wish you all have a great summer holidays, lots of sunshine and lots of possibilities to recharge your batteries. Thank you, Jakub, for being a phenomenal co-host of the whole webinar series. And I guess we already now may tell that we will plan something for the autumn, and probably summer will give us a chance also to work on some nice elaborated content in the SPM webinar series. Thank you, Jakub.
Thank you, Krzysztof. Thank you all, and have a great summer. Stay tuned.
Thank you. Have a good one, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.